Hello, workers and friends. Welcome back to Anti-Imperialist America. I'm your host, Dust James, the Marxist-Leninist truck driver, coming to you live from my humble home in rural North Carolina. This is a special episode. This is my first Anti-Imperialist America where I've had guests. Usually I reserve my guests for my interview series or my other show with Working Class Revolt with Australian comrade, UK comrade. But I'm super excited about this, and y'all are in for the treat. I have two wonderful people with me, including one of my personal heroes and inspiration, sister, comrade, Cindy Sheehan, the peace mom, insurgent politician, revolutionary, socialist, big part of the struggle. Comrade Cindy Sheehan, how you doing?
We're doing good. Yeah, thank you. Don't call me sister.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just kidding. We always heard that was very liberal, comrade. No, you're fine. You can call me sister. You can call me Cindy.
Comrade Cindy Sheehan, I stand
don't call
corrected.
me
Right
late
on.
for lunch, right?
It's from the labor movement. That's I've
Right.
had similar training.
Well,
Um,
and we always, I always thought that before someone became a comrade, they were sisters or brothers, right?
yeah, so I'll call
That's the
you
way I feel.
comrade.
Okay, I appreciate
Comrade Sheehan, right on.
it.
And we're very honored to be joined by Slava. And Slava is from Western Ukraine originally. I met her in Chicago over the last weekend at the Center for Political Innovation Unite Against the Imperialist Conference. She has her own YouTube show, Kitchen Garden Therapy. Um, Thank you for coming on. How are you doing?
Hi everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I'm doing good. I'm excited to be here.
Right on. Thank you for. Would you prefer to be called? I gotta get the pronouns right.
You can just call me Slava.
Slava. Well, thank you, Slava, for coming on. Everybody's getting settled in. Why everybody's getting settled in? Please like
That's
this video.
interesting. My pronoun is comrade. I like that. So I ask me what my pronoun is. I'll say comrade.
All right, please like this video. Please share it out. Share it on Twitter. Share it on Facebook. Make this a bigger conversation. Get in the comments. Maybe we'll be able to respond to some of those comments. We'll be able to bring you on screen as well. Shout out to Richard, Fernando. Thank you for being with us. So we'll get right into it. If you look at the title for today's show, it is Grow Peace, which is it's not really my bag. I come off kind of hard. I'm always like yelling at the screen and what have you, and I'm mad at the imperialist. And it's good to like relax a little bit every now and then. And I have two great comrades here that can help me do that. I remember Cindy Sheehan. I remember back in the day on the wall, maybe 2010, before that, around Obama or something, and there was like a flower picture with like military families. Were you involved with that, or I don't remember?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
All right, there was like this cool flower picture with military families.
Yeah.
It reminded you, and I think you're into gardening and you're vegan, and you got a lot of a lot of that going on.
Who, me?
Yeah.
I'm very into alternative health practices, and still healthy.
Right on. Thank you.
No COVID, no nothing. After all these years, I don't know. I feel left out. I think of COVID.
Thank you. So we have Slava on, and you have your herbs behind you. You grow in your garden, or?
Yeah, so this is my home-built herbal apothecary, which most of the herbs that I have here, I grew myself in my own garden. Some of the herbs my mom brought for me from Ukraine because they are nowhere to be found here. And then some of the herbs I had to purchase. But mostly I try to grow all of my herbs myself in my garden. So I have like vegetable garden, flower garden, and medicinal garden. And all of this I'm growing on a really small Chicago backyard. If you ever been to Chicago, you know how small and tiny the houses are and the backyards. So yes, we have a little bit of room, but we're trying to make most of it. And I grow all of the things myself because I know the value of these herbs. It's amazing to have your own pharmacy, your own apothecary. Anytime I need something for myself or for my family, I can just come to my bedroom and grab a thing, and we don't have to go to a hospital.
Nice.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Well, that's great. But this is a political show, and we're gonna get into it. Slava is.
Give me just 1 second.
Go ahead,
1
go
second.
ahead.
Yeah, somebody's not.
Go ahead. Take your time. Let's see. Cindy Sheehan. You recently moved your chat from. You had a. Now you're on Substack.
Yes.
Before you were on another site.
Blogspot. Yeah.
Everyone can check out Cindy Sheehan's work in the link below, as well as Slava's gardening, kitchen garden therapy channel. You can subscribe to Slava in the link below on the description. So, like I was saying, this is a political show. It's anti-imperialist, working class anti-imperialist analysis. And I met Slava at a conference where I openly said that I stand with the people of Russia and the people of China against the U.S. imperialists. Now, it's been difficult coming up, in the U.S. South and the military town, having that where I love the people, but I'm not a big fan of the government. I'm not a big fan of what people send their sons and daughters to do. What the U.S. military has done to Afghanistan, what it's done to Iraq, and this recent period with the outbreak of the conflict in the Ukraine. There's been massive, Russophobia, and there's been a use of the Ukrainian people to weaponize the cause of the Ukrainian people to further the imperialist system. And it's really sad. And I wanted to get Slava's perspective as somebody who came up in Ukraine.
Yes, it was really hard for me to witness everything that's happening in Ukraine because I have a family over there. And I've been living in the United States for 10 years, but piece of my heart is always there in Ukraine with my family, with my friends. And growing up in Ukraine, I witnessed how this pro-imperialist propaganda was settled on people. People were torn between the pro-West and pro-Russia. Some people were always speaking Russian in Ukraine. So they were friendly with Russian people and Russian government, and they didn't want to abandon their language and their culture. But others were programmed to hate everything Russian, and they were taught to be pro-West. They thought that they can't be friendly with both sides, that they have to be on one of the sides. So there is a lot of Russophobia in Ukraine, and it's been going on like that for ages. Since the 90s, I remember in school, we were being taught that Russia is bad and Russian people are bad and Ukraine is better. And I didn't understand back then as a kid why it's being promoted, why they teach us that stuff. Only later when I grew up and I started getting interested in politics, because when I was a kid, I got involved in Jehovah's Witness religion. So I was very highly religious, and Jehovah's Witnesses, they can't be political. So politics were prohibited. We couldn't talk about it. So I was not into politics when I was a kid. But then after I moved to the United States, I quit Jehovah's Witnesses and I started being interested in politics. And I started to understand that everything that, some Ukrainian people are experiencing and that Russophobia that's happening in Ukraine, it's not organic. It's being pushed on them. People in their nature, they're not hateful. People are made to love and be friendly with everybody. But when there is imperialist powers involved, they are interested in putting people against each other, and they want people to hate each other. So later I understood that that's what's happening. So what I try to do now is to talk to people and try to tell them the alternative sides, the other opinion, you know. So I ask them the question, how come you don't hear anything else but this? Why you only hear one side of the story? Anytime something is happening, you have to look at the other side. So that's what I'm trying to do now. Ever since this conflict started, I'm trying to talk to all of my family and friends. It's hard because, you know, their feelings are hurt because they're in the war, but I try to do that.
Thank you. So, is there any way you could refresh your video? We lost your video with us. Maybe just refresh the tab again.
Yes, I will do that.
She'll be right back with us. Cindy Sheehan, maybe a quick response to her journey. You are muted.
I muted myself while Slava was talking.
Okay.
So it seems like what she was going through when she was being in her, you know, formative years in Ukraine is a lot like what we go through here in the United States. Now, I'm, you know, a Cold War baby. And so what we went through was a very concerted, very dedicated effort to make us hate the Soviet Union, to make us hate China. Those were the two major, and Cuba. So of course, I was just a toddler when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. But I actually remember how nervous and anxious my grown-ups were when that was happening. And we came very close to a nuclear war with the Soviet Union at that time frame. But when I was in second grade, so I was 7, it was 1964, my second grade teacher actually asked us this question. I'll never forget it, and I've written it down. I've done articles about it. She said, "What would you do if a red communist," they always called them red communists, walked up to you and put a gun to your head and said, "If you recite the Pledge of Allegiance, I'm going to blow your brains out"? And so that's child abuse, right? We were only 7 years old. And so I raised my hand because I knew this like answer for sure. And she's like, "Okay, Cindy, what would you do?" And I said, I wouldn't say it, you know, because I didn't want to get my head blown off. And so I was labeled a traitor at 7 years old. I was put in a corner and I was told I should stand there until I didn't hate the United States so much. And Slava being you know, I don't know if you still are, but Jehovah's Witnesses,
No.
they very correctly do not pledge.
Yes.
Right? They don't
Yes.
pledge allegiance to a rectangular piece of cloth. And the one we have in the United States is like symbolically soaked with blood, in my opinion.
Very powerful testimony. Slava, so you gave us a little bit about your backstory. Let's dig in a little deeper. You said when you got to the United States, you started to realize that, you know, what you were told as a child about the evil Russians wasn't true. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that portion of your journey.
Yeah, so I started being interested in politics, reading the news, because I was trying to learn the language and assimilate and, you know, get used to the people and the life here in the United States. As a new immigrant, I was talking to Americans. I was trying to get their opinion on everything, you know, not just weather and what's happening currently. I was trying to get their opinion on the president and politics. And as I was speaking to people and reading newspapers, watching news, I realized that the United States is involved in so many wars and conflicts. And I'm like, I never heard of this. How come I never heard of this? Why? Living in Ukraine, they don't tell this to us. They say United States is the most peaceful and, you know, it's a democracy and everybody's free and they're just helping everybody. And it's the Russia who's going around and bombing everybody. And then I learned that it's, United States is involved in so many conflicts, and it's going to countries and extracting their natural resources and carpet bombing the cities, and millions of people get killed in those wars. So I was really surprised, and that kind of opened my eyes on this whole paradigm, and I started to analyze all the teachings I received as a kid. I started questioning everything and doing a lot of research. And then I realized that even what they say on the TV here, it's being very whitewashed. They admit about the conflicts and wars, but they defend it. They say, "Oh, there's bad guys over there. We have to go and kill them." So, I started looking into that and trying to see if the media is telling the truth. And I realized that not always. Sometimes they do, but they add a lot of lies to the truth, and they whitewash the bad stuff that they are doing. So I started looking into alternative media, and I'm very happy that we have social media where independent journalists can share their work. And of course, there's a lot of censorship on social media, and it's hard to get to the valuable truth, but it's still available. So now we can learn about what's actually happening and how the imperialist countries are, what they're doing to the world.
Very powerful. That's a wonderful journey. I think a lot of the people here on this show, this is a working class show. I came up in North Carolina. I think I wanted to be a U.S. soldier when I was like 5 years old. I thought, I looked up, so I was like, hey man, look how straight they stand up. Look how disciplined and proud of themselves they are. And it's somewhat appealing. We're told that this is the people that are keeping us free. These are the people that make everything good that we have in our life possible, and we should thank them every moment we get. And then, later on when I, in high school, I had a little bit of Quaker influence. But I mentioned, look at how they're treating working class people. Look at how they're treating immigrants. And look at these massive wars of destruction that are killing people. And these wars don't affect us or help us any. I think Cindy Sheehan's journey was really influential to me. I remember being in theater class, and this was like 2005, 2004 or 5. This is right after the invasion of Iraq, and everybody's talking about this horrible person who is using her son's death to manipulate people to support the evil Hugo Chavez. Not this person. Not only did they go against the war that was necessary for our freedom, but they went and met with the evil Hugo Chavez, and they're a traitor to us. And I was listening. I was thinking, man, I don't like these wars. Who is this Hugo Chavez person? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that part of your story, Cindy Sheehan, and how it relates here.
My story about Hugo Chavez.
Yeah, and as well as becoming the peace mom.
Oh, okay. My son was killed in Iraq on April 4th, 2004. I grew up during Vietnam. I wasn't naive to what the United States does around the world at all. But, we were very working class, and Casey thought he was doing the family a service. He was the oldest son by joining the military because they promise all these, lie about all these benefits they're going to get at college and etc. He already had one college degree, and he wanted to get his bachelor's degree. He already had an AA degree, but he was he was a Eagle Scout. He was an altar server. He taught Sunday school. I mean, he was really a fabulous young person. But so he did join the military. We were opposed to it, his dad and I. We were devastated when he had to go to Iraq. So was he. And he told people, he goes, I can't kill anybody. He was a Humvee mechanic, and so he was in Iraq for about a week, and he was killed in combat. He was forced to go on the mission. I learned from one of his fellow soldiers that was right by him at the time. So anyway, I did go to Crawford, Texas about 16 months later after Casey was killed to demand what noble cause was Casey killed for, not just Casey, but hundreds of thousands of Iraqi and, a couple thousand other U.S. troops by then. But I was invited to the World Social Forum. I wasn't a socialist yet. As a matter of fact, I was still a Democrat at that time, a registered Democrat, I'm ashamed to admit. And I got to meet and sit with the great socialist revolutionary Hugo Chavez. And I also met at that same time, because the World Social Forum was in Caracas, there were dignitaries from Cuba that came over, and they were actually like my translators. They were my help to get me from point A to point B. And one of them was Ricardo. I'll think of his last name. I can't think of it right now. But he fought in the revolution right next to Che and Fidel and Raul. At that time, he was president of their National Assembly in Cuba, and the Minister of Culture were like my escorts. And I didn't really understand how important these people were to Cuba and to the rest of Latin America, because the workers of Latin America, the people, supported Cuba and the Cuban Revolution, and they supported Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution. And so I got to go to Venezuela and Cuba several times to be with Chavez and to be with other revolutionaries when I went to Cuba. And I have to say, I was 2 when the Cuban Revolution happened. And so, of course, for my entire life, I was lied to. There was not even one bit of truth in what the media said about Cuba, what the government said about Cuba. So I went a year after I went to Caracas. So I was already getting more into the Bolivarian Revolution, how it helped the people of Venezuela, and the very capable and strong leadership under the strong leadership of Hugo Chavez. And I was invited to Cuba. And at that time, it was super illegal to go. Now it's kind of questionable. Maybe we can go. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. But the first time I went, it was very illegal. And so we went through Cancun, Mexico, and we flew to Cancun, then we got on a flight over to Havana. And I was I have to say, I was a little trepidatious about doing that, about all the horrible things I heard about Cuba my whole life. And I got there, and it was, like I said, 180 from what I was propagandized my whole life. Cuba is a wonderful socialist state where the people are taken care of. And Slava, you would like their medical process, because it's all local. It starts with your doctor that comes to your house, and he sits with the family. He'll even have a beer with the family. He looks in the refrigerator to make sure they have enough healthy food. He knows the family. He knows the children, the grandparents, and the community. It's a neighborhood. In Cuba, everything is the neighborhood. It's the community. And so if something happens and he doesn't think, or he or she doesn't think, so many female medical professionals in Cuba, if he or she doesn't think that he or she can help, they will refer you one other step up the ladder. They reserve painkillers for people in hospice, where I think they do good. There's no depression, no such thing as an antidepressant, no such thing as all of these crazy prescriptions on top of, because they don't need them. Their food is fresh, non-GMO. They don't have access to chemical fertilizer because of the United States blockade. So I was watching this mainstream show on cable, and this guy was going to look for treasure, for like a shipwreck. And it happened in off the coast of Havana. So he went to like this university in Havana to look at records, but he showed a lot of street life there, and he actually said, wow, I thought Cuba was a very oppressive society, but look at all of these people there, look at how much fun they're having, because it's always dancing and singing. And I'm not saying there's not problems. There are problems just like anywhere, but the Cuban system, I don't even say government, because it's the same as in Caracas. The people are as much involved in their lives as the government is. And so, but anyway, he was just shocked at all of the joy and vibrance. And the cops don't even carry guns. They just like walk around and stroll around with the people and chat with the people. Stand on the corner, smoke a cigarette or something with them. So yeah, it's a completely different situation. And besides, if you don't have to worry about where is your education coming from?
Exactly.
How am I going to pay for it? Where's my health care coming from? Where's my housing? It's against the law to be homeless in Cuba. People don't have to worry about those things that constantly drain the life out of people here in the United States.
Yeah, that's how it used to be under Soviet Union. People didn't have to worry about education, about medicine. Everything was free, everything was available. And of course, I was born in Soviet Union, but I didn't live. It collapsed, so I had to grow up in the independent Ukraine. But I've heard stories about people, even those who complain, because they were taught that Soviets are bad, so they think bad of Soviet Union, but they still bring up those good things that they remember. They're like, oh, now I have to pay so much for education. Back then it was free. Or about healthcare, Now, if somebody gets sick in Ukraine, they have to spend so much money because they changed the system. Now it's like in the United States, you have to have insurance and you have to pay everything out of pocket. So people bring up those social things, medicine, education, and that kind of gives me opportunity to talk to them that, you see, you think of socialism as something bad, but socialism is good. It's for people. If people, they don't think it this way. They only listen to the bad stuff, and even that so-called bad stuff is mainly lies. So, but they don't know that until you start telling them about it.
Right.
And also, you were talking about how Cuba, how healthy they were. They didn't have anything bad coming because of the blockade. Remember recently, ever since this conflict started with Ukraine and Russia, a lot of corporations like McDonald's, KFS and other fast food chains, they said, that's it, we're coming out of Russia. We don't want to do anything. And I was like,
I know, how
awesome,
lucky.
Good. Yeah, how lucky,
how lucky for the people of Russia.
Yeah, I'm like, they're going to be healthy.
I thought the same thing too.
Yeah, they'll eat their own food. They'll grow organic food. They're not going to have, I hope Monsanto moves out too, so there is no GMO stuff. I don't think they allow GMO there, but I'm not sure.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah, in Europe in general, not just in Russia, things are changing now. But when I was growing up, I remember people didn't like genetically modified stuff. They didn't like pesticides, herbicides, all the chemicals, all this stuff. People were trying to grow food naturally, the way it's supposed to be. So in the past few years, things are changing, but I hope McDonald's leaves. United States too.
I know. How do we get that hardship? how do we make McDonald's leave? I mean, how many countries does the United States have to invade and occupy and destroy before McDonald's and KFC and Burger King leave the United States, Pizza Hut, whatever. It's like Russia went into Ukraine, and it's grow peace. I'm not a pacifist. I like, I hardly ever, I don't start any physical altercations, but I would protect the innocent. I would protect myself. I would protect my community. But, Russia and Putin for at least 8 years since 2014. And like you said before, been trying very hard not to do what they finally did this year. But the United States, there's 1,000 bases in, I think, like 150 countries around the world. We're bombing countless countries, occupying militarily, even though we're not at war with Japan. We have so many military bases in Japan, and the people in the communities are regularly raped. I want to say rape is a big problem from the U.S. soldiers to the women in the communities. It's a big problem. But everywhere there's a base, they have this agreement that the U.S. troops won't be held accountable. They can't be prosecuted under civil law in that community. So they pretty much have carte blanche to do whatever they want in wherever they occupy with a military base. And a lot of the people in these communities, whether it's Japan or Germany, Philippines, Korea, wherever the U.S. is occupying but not in active war, there's also a big movement to get the bases removed, get U.S. bases removed from there. But of course, the governments are in complete agreement over this. The U.S. military brings lots of, money to these communities, but everywhere they go, they're like a Superfund site. They bring lots of poison, lots of crime, and looking at it as somebody on the ground, it just seems like they bring more trouble than they bring anything positive whenever the U.S. military is someplace around the world. Yes. And why is the U.S. military are all in all these? The only really place the U.S. military should be is in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't be like all over the world with 900 foreign bases. It's a racket. That's all it is.
Yeah, the soldiers don't even have to do anything. Just the fact that the base exists is already a provocation,
Right.
I like the way they say in media here, and the people among themselves, they say, oh, such an unprovoked war Russia caused. And I'm like, unprovoked? Right. What do you mean? I mean, the war didn't start in February. It started in 2014. Yep. And I was not in Ukraine back then. I was already here. But I remember I was following that uprising from the beginning because I thought it's an uprising. I thought it's an organic, because I'm on the side of the people. And if people uprise, if people start rebelling against the government, I'll be on the side of the people. So I was following it. I thought it's organic. But then I realized it's not organic. It was not only co-opted throughout the whole process, but it was started. It was caused by the West, So United States from the beginning, they were sponsoring it and they were trying to overthrow the legitimate government of Ukraine back then. And I didn't like that government either, but that's not the reason to foreign forces to come in and overthrow. If people of the country want to do it on their own, that's up to them. I'm always for people. But if the foreign countries are trying to get involved and do a coup d'etat, I'm against that. So when all that stuff was happening in Ukraine, and I quickly realized that it's not the people, and I was not on that. I was not pro-revolution because it brought a lot of trouble to Ukraine. If you remember that president, Viktor Yanukovych, who was the president of Ukraine at that time, he had to escape to Russia. He was running for his life. They were coming to kill him. So he had to escape. And I believe he's still in Russia. And then because of the new government that was established afterwards, it was very right-wing, very nationalistic, like fascist-leaning government at that time. And we know that under such conditions, people don't have freedoms. So in Ukraine, there were always two languages, Ukrainian and Russian. The west of Ukraine were always speaking Ukrainian. That's where I'm from. I knew Russian from books and movies, but I never learned Russian in school. But then on the east of Ukraine, people didn't speak Ukrainian. They only spoke Russian. And there were schools in Russian, books in Russian, and there were church services. Everything was in Russian. But then this new government started started to outlaw Russian language. So that was, that came the oppression that people were fearing. And those eastern states, they're like, we didn't agree with this. We didn't want this revolution or the coup, so they wanted autonomy. They didn't ask for independence. They didn't want to join Russia. They just wanted to have an autonomy. I'm not sure if a lot of people are familiar, but Crimea, up until Russia annexed Crimea, they had the referendum, they voted, they wanted to join Russia. It's their right. But up until then, Ukraine was part of Crimea was part of Ukraine, but they had autonomy. They were never the state. Like Ukraine had 24 states and Crimea. Crimea was always separately. They had their own parliament. They had their own president. So these two states on the east, Donetsk and Lugansk, they wanted the same thing, the same kind of rights. They wanted to have autonomy, so they don't have to put up with the fascistic government that was outlawing the Russian language and media, everything. So many media had to be changed from Russian language to Ukrainian. They were forced into speaking Ukrainian, and people who were born speaking Russian, they didn't agree with that. And even though I was speaking Ukrainian, I didn't want other people to be forced. You don't have to force other people to speak the language you want them, So yeah, the government of Ukraine at that time, they didn't allow them autonomy. They didn't want to leave them alone. So they actually launched a war, a full war, but they didn't call it a war. A lot of Ukrainians right now are complaining that Putin is not calling this a war. He's calling it special operation. Mm-hmm. Well, Ukrainians for 8 years didn't call the war on Donbass region. They didn't call it a war either. They called it anti-terrorist operation. So basically, it was short ATO. Maybe you've heard this term. Ukrainians used it a lot. ATO means anti-terrorist operation. So they were calling people of Donbass, people who wanted to have autonomy and just be free and just govern themselves, they were calling them terrorists. And they were calling them many other names, which I'm not going to even bring up. But it was so hard to witness all of this. For 8 years, I was talking to other Ukrainians who were supporting all that. Mm-hmm. And I was like, why you do that? These people have a right.
It looks like we lost Slava. Okay, let me add her back. All right, go ahead, continue.
Okay. I don't know why my laptop is doing this to me. It keeps kicking me out. It doesn't want me to talk about politics, I guess. So yes.
Or somebody doesn't want you to talk about politics. It might not be your laptop.
Yeah. So for all this time, from 2014, I was trying to tell people that what Ukrainian so-called government, because I don't even recognize them as a government, they installed themselves. Right. People didn't vote for that. I mean, later on they did vote, but in the beginning it was done without any votes. It was just a coup, basically, a takeover. And they used all kinds of tricks. I've kind of followed the revolutions all around the world, not organic revolutions, but those that were done from
the color
outside
revolutions.
Yes, and I know
the National Endowment for Democracy here in the United States.
Exactly, and I noticed that in Ukraine, every trick on the book was used. Like everything was used, And this is, by the way, not the first revolution they tried. In 2003, 2004. Ukraine have experienced its first color revolution. It was called orange.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was still in high school back then, and I remember our teachers were telling us, "Let's go and protest. Let's go and fight for freedom." And I was like, "Freedom of what? We're free. We're independent Ukraine." So yeah, it was a big deal back then. There were two parties fighting. The guy who was pro-Russia, that who later became the president and had to escape, that Yanukovych guy, and there was a pro-United States guy. His wife is actually a United States citizen. So the West was trying to establish him as a president, and the other guy was just trying to be friendly with Russia, because we had a lot of business going on with Russia, all the energy, everything, all the gas, the electricity, everything was going through Ukraine to Europe. So it was in Ukraine's interest to be friendly with Russia. But that's not what the United States wanted at that time. So that first color revolution was when things turned ugly. And Ukraine was never the same after that. It was never at peace from 2004 until 2014. There were always things going on. And then in 2014, the full civil war, because I call it civil war, because when a government of the country goes into states and starts bombing them, I think that's a civil war.
Well, another interesting thing, sorry, Dust, is that when you look at media from prior to 2014, but certainly prior to 2016, well, when Putin helped Trump, caused Trump to be president of the United States. I'm just joking. They were saying that, Ukraine, the media here, the corporate media here doesn't say this anymore, but they were saying it then. We're saying it's the most corrupt country in Europe. Right?
Yes,
and
always was.
Yeah. So they had very negative things. The corporate media here had very negative things to say about Ukraine before the U.S. sponsored coup in 2014. And then I think in 2016, when Putin, came over here and knocked on doors to get Trump elected president, he passed out flyers and did all kinds of stuff. They had the right line on what was happening in Ukraine, but then now we had to, since Hillary lost to Putin, essentially, we had to be very anti-Russia. There had to be all these kind of Russiagate hysteria fomented. And so that put Ukraine, the people of Ukraine, the people who have to pay for global imperialist powers and the games they play, that put them in the crosshairs, unfortunately. Yes. And I think another thing that you said that I thought of, it wasn't just like the people of Lugansk and Donetsk wanted to have autonomy. It was put into the Minsk agreement that even though they would still remain part of Ukraine, they would have some special autonomy for sovereignty, for self-government, like Crimea. But when Yushchenko was overthrown, right, they started to heavily murder people in that, not give them any kind of autonomy, but start, murdering them systematically. And how long, like, I don't know. I don't like to compare other countries to the United States, because I just wonder what would happen if Mexico started like bombing Los Angeles and killing Americans. What would the United States do? I don't know what they would do. It's just like nothing good to help people, right? They think, oh, this is a great opportunity to go steal Mexico's oil. I think that's what the United States would think if something like that happened.
Yes.
I know I have two great guests, when I could just sit back and like great and wonderful things are unfolded. That was
Sorry,
very
we're not allowing you
powerful.
speak.
No,
Does,
it's fine. No, it's
yeah,
fine.
does you just go into the chat and Slava and I will finish the show up.
No, there was a lot of wonderful and great things just said there. Slava's understanding of Ukrainian history and being so
It was
connected to it.
awesome. Everybody
Um,
here needs to hear it.
and then maybe I can. There's a little bit. I think we're kind of milling around, and it's hard to get things lined up linear, especially when we've been lied to for so long. Maybe I can bring in some of my experience. I'm a little bit younger than the both of y'all, and I came up right after the fall of the Soviet Union. But that there was still that lingering, the evil Russians. You know what I'm trying to say? I think in the 90s was like a horrible time. That was when I grew up. It was a horrible time for Russia. The neoliberal politics, basically the Western capitalists took anything that wasn't nailed down, and 10% of the country either fled or died. I mean, that is absolutely horrible. So we're taught, so communism is evil and Stalin is evil. They did all these horrible things. I think there was this video game I played, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, and the people were like, "Man, we were always told to hate the Russians, but I didn't even see nothing until the Soviet Union fell, and the Russians started coming over because it was horrible conditions over there." And what we're not told about, I know. Cindy Sheehan grew up in the Cold War, and they were told, "Oh, the evil Russians, and we're taught, "Oh, the evil Cubans." And Cindy Sheehan said some good stuff about Cuba. I think flag behind me is the capitalist flag. Am I still? I have the Russian flag behind me, and it's the capitalist flag. But they're an autonomous country, and they can choose their flag and choose their government. But I mean, under Soviet Russia, they were helping out Cuba, they were helping out North Korea, and when the Soviet Union fell, there was a period of starvation in Cuba.
Mass starvation in Cuba.
There was
That's when all the boat people started coming, right, from Cuba over to Florida, and people were like, "Oh, it's because they hate communism." No, they hate starving to death. And the United States. I'm sorry, Dust, to interrupt you.
Okay.
It's
good to hear you add.
The United States could have stepped in as a good neighbor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And filled that void easily. The United States could have easily, with its resources, funds, anything, filled the void that was left by the Soviet Union. And we could have made a different Cuba-U.S. relations. But what did they do? They tightened the blockade against, and they made it impossible for anybody to trade with Cuba or to help Cuba. And so thousands and thousands of people starved. And since I've been there, I've heard the stories from people who were there. The women used to grind banana peels to cook for their families. So yeah, it was just a very terrible time, and it just shows how the dichotomy with the Soviet Union and what China is doing in the world now. They have their Silk Road project where they go in and they build roads, and it's not like you don't have to get loans from the IMF to do this. China builds roads, the United States destroys them. So it's this difference between the Soviet Union, China, and the United States.
Thank you. They also was starvation in North Korea. Basically, the Soviet Union was helping out people in the oppressed world all over the place. And I think in the neoliberal period in Russia, it continued. But there was a movement, Putin nationalized oil and gas, started reinvesting in the country. And then those programs helped again. The Russians were selling wheat, not only wheat, but fertilizer to the people of Africa. Mm-hmm. And now there's mass starvation in Africa because the Russians can't sell because the U.S. controls the global finance mechanisms. Russia has been aligned with China. And, with the new project of building things up, the show is Grow Peace. That doesn't mean I'm a pacifist. It means if we want to grow peace, we're going to have to feed people and
Mhm.
build people up. War comes out of, scarcity and people fighting over limited resources. And I think, the United States, their economic model of, where a few banks and corporations and oil companies, control the entire society and the global economy.
And big pharma. Don't forget big
Big
pharma.
pharma, put them in there.
Yeah.
It's on its way out and it's going down. We're seeing China, socialist China, aligned with anti-imperialist Russia, and we're seeing them do good things for people and build people up. Um, let's see. Let's go back to Slava. Um, maybe you can talk a little bit about, you went through a little bit of the history, but maybe you can talk about how you see the fall of the Soviet Union in relation to Ukraine, as well as the emergence of Putin and Russia becoming an ally of oppressed nations.
Yes, as we've talked about post-Soviet times, Cindy and you touched a bit about how it was happening after Soviet Union collapsed. So in 90s, it was a hard period of time for a lot of countries, and in Ukraine, it was also really tough. The inflation was so high, the money was worth nothing. People had money, like paper money, but you couldn't buy anything. There were like shortages of everything because of all of the blockades, and there was impossible to do any business. It was really hard time, and I understand why people, they were trying to build relationship with other countries. So in 90s, Ukraine started looking how to do business as an independent country, and they had to make this choice between. They didn't have to, but the West was forcing them. Let's put it this way. So I think in a free world, any country can do business with anybody they want to. And they have to think first about for the goods of their own people. The interest of people is supposed to be on the first place, then the diplomacy with other countries. But the West was pressuring Ukraine into only dealing with them and abandon Russia. And I was witnessing that, and I didn't like that. And I think a lot of people in the east and the west, in the east and south of Ukraine, they saw that too. So because they were ethnically Russian, they liked Russia. So why they have to abandon that? And I think this, over the years, this tension was growing and growing and growing, and then it turned out into a full-fledged war, which a lot of people say it was unprovoked, but it was definitely provoked. They were poking the bear for years. And let's remember that NATO was keep bringing their bases closer and closer to Russia. They were not supposed to do that. The whole existence of NATO was for the Soviet Union, right? Mm-hmm. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, the NATO should have been abolished. We're not supposed to have NATO anymore, but it's still there and it keeps growing, and they keep pushing their military bases closer and closer to Russia. And when people tell me that Russia is aggressive, I'm like, who's aggressive here? Do we have Russian military bases in Canada or in Mexico looking at us? We don't have that. I don't know, maybe this is a rumor, but I've heard that right before the Crimea became Russian, there was supposed to be a deal of making American base at the Crimean Peninsula. I don't know if this information is verified or not, but that kind of makes sense, because Crimea is right there by Russia. So it would have been very good for them to have a base over there. And now I understand why it was so eager for Russia to have Crimea on their side, because they don't want a base right there in front of their nose. So yeah, and what happened as you, Cindy, mentioned about Minsk agreements, that Donbass were supposed to get their autonomy and they didn't. Those agreements were not honored, and Ukraine was still bombing them. And then this new President Zelensky, who was running a few years ago, he was running as a peacemaker. He was promising to stop the war. That's why 73%, which is a big deal. When do we get? I mean, only in socialist countries it happens when a lot of big percentage of people vote. Usually in capitalist countries, it's 40%, something like that. This was 73%, first time in the history of Ukraine, probably. So many people have voted for him because he was promising to stop this bombing, you know, what he called ATO, the anti-terrorist operation. And people believed him. People wanted peace. Nobody, you know, because the government of Ukraine was not fighting themselves. You know, they were sending somebody's husbands and sons to fight people, you know, in Donbass. So on both sides, people were dying. Of course, more people were dying on Donbass side because there's just two states over there and the whole Ukraine against them. But still, a lot of people have died on Ukrainian side, and people didn't like that. They didn't want to send their sons to war. So everybody wanted to finish that. And this guy was running as a promise. He was like, I will end this. I will honor Minsk agreements. I will make sure those people live in peace. And people fell for it. They voted for him. They brought him up. And he was a comedian, ironically. Ironically, people should have known better that, you know, he was not a politician. And I'm not saying that only politicians should run. Right. Everybody should do it. But still, he was an actor, and I'm not sure if you're familiar. He was actually playing a president on TV.
Yep.
There was this show made. It was called Servant of the People, and he was playing there this regular teacher, a simple guy, poor guy who was riding bicycle to school, and he was pro people. And one time he had this rant as how he hates government, and students filmed him and posted on social media, and it went viral, and people wanted him to become president, and he did, and he been a good president in the movie. Right. In the movie, he was good. He was all pro people and very like defending the interest. But then after the movie finished, people are like, oh, maybe the actor who played the president should be a president. So they started a campaign, and he's like, yeah, why not? But life is different from a movie. And people quickly understood that he's not going to fulfill his promises, his campaign that he was running on. He didn't honor it. He continued. Not only he continued, he escalated it. He made it worse. And I was so shocked when that was happening, because I really hoped that it would end, but it didn't, because the United States kept pouring helping them with all the money and all the weapons. How come this guy became so rich? This Zelensky, he's worth billions of dollars now. He's right. Making money. Ukraine is like a black hole. Everything that's being sent there, it's either coming back to the politicians here because their families somehow involved, or it's going into pockets of Ukrainian politicians, but it's never going to people.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's only adding fuel to the fire, not actually putting the fire.
We're running near the end of the show. There's one more point I wanted to hammer home before we roll up, before we end it. You mentioned about Ukrainian deaths during the assaults on the people of the Donbass. Right now, there is massive casualties within the Ukrainian forces. They're continuing to send weapons.
Yes.
But it's Ukrainians that are dying in a war against Russia that primarily benefits Western corporations. Maybe you can talk about, your connection with the Ukrainian people. The sad, this is a horrible thing. It's a sad thing when, regardless of who they're fighting for or who they're being manipulated by, when people are dying, it's a horrible thing. Maybe you can talk about the situation right now that's going on in your country.
Yes, definitely. Every time people talk about this war, I tell them that this is United States fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian.
Right.
It's not the Ukrainians who are fighting. Ukrainians are just being used as pawns in the chess game. And I have a great number of my family members over there fighting. 3 of my cousins are actually right now enlisted. They have been drafted. They have no choice. They couldn't say no. They had to go, unfortunately. And I'm so upset. I hope the best for them. I don't want them to die
Right.
for nothing, die for nothing. It's not that it's benefiting them, definitely. Also, my dad and my brother are still in Ukraine. I was able to take my mom here. She lives here in the United States with me. But my dad and my brother, they cannot leave. Ukrainian government is prohibiting men from 18 to 60 to leave the country. And they don't want to fight. They don't. I'm so afraid that they will be drafted, especially because my dad has military experience. He's been under Soviet times. He was at war already when Soviets were in Afghanistan. So as somebody with experience, they may draft him again. I hope that's not going to happen, because I see that very few people were hardcore patriotic. They wanted to go and fight. Very few. Those had went in the first wave. But now people are resisting. People don't want to go and fight because they know that it's for nothing. It's not for their interest. So a lot of people are trying to escape the country with different ways. They're trying to leave the country through Moldova, through Poland, but it's very hard. When I see that Ukraine is stopping usually when there's a war and people are fleeing, it's an understandable thing. You're supposed to help refugees, you're supposed to help people survive the war. Not in this case. Now they're not allowing people. They don't want them to leave. They want them to stay and die. And slowly people are starting to see it. I've noticed that in the beginning, in like February, March, a lot of Ukrainians were like, kill the Russians. They were like so hardcore. They wanted to fight. Now I see that the mood is changing. Now people are starting to question the Ukrainian government. They're starting to see that the Ukrainian government is profiting of this war. So hopefully this awakening, of people will keep happening and people will realize that it's not their war. It's not what they're being told. So I really hope so. I'll be doing my best to talk to my family and my friends about it and try to open their eyes and see the other side of the story. And hopefully more and more people will realize it.
Let's get we're over time, but let's get a concluding statement from Comrade Cindy Sheehan.
Thank you. So I just want to respond to one of the viewers, Joshua Brown. He said that I was right the whole time about COVID-19 and opposition to the synthetic left. And so, and he wants me to, I remember you, Joshua. I remember our battles on Facebook, but unfortunately I'm not on Facebook anymore. So follow me on Substack, Cindy Sheehan Soapbox Substack. I'm kind of using it as my social media where people can come and they can comment on, and I keep in touch with people. But the one thing that I was thinking when Slava was talking was that the only thing that's going to stop imperialism, and believe me, it's this juggernaut that is, it has its grubby paws in every country and almost every community. Here on here in the United States, we're no more than 50 miles away from a military installation or a recruiting center, or wherever you live, unless you live like in the middle of nowhere, we are very close to so imperialism, what I'm saying, it's a pandemic that we need to control. But the only thing that's going to stop it is international solidarity in the working class.
Yes.
Me and Slava and Dust and you all recognizing that we need to stop fighting the battles of the global imperialists for them. They get rich, we suffer, whether you have a son killed or not. If you live in the United States, imperialism is strangling your community, your families. It's strangling you to death. So we have to realize here in the United States, especially, we think we're so special. We're like special in the world. We need to realize that everybody in every country, all 7 billion plus people on this planet, have the same existential right as we do, even if they don't have more of one because of what our nation does around the world. So quit falling into the Democrat Republican trap, and let's join together in this international working class solidarity, just people to people, and just refuse to be pawns in their games for profit. War is nothing but a big money laundering scheme. And they don't, and the people who are profiting don't care how many people have to die for their bank accounts. You know, plain truth. That's just the plain truth.
Well, thank you everyone for attending, and big thank you to you both for coming on.
I had fun. It was nice meeting Slava.
Yes,